I sheltered an injured alien woman. The next morning, soldiers came asking where their queen was. The wind on Marrow's Reach never stopped. That was the first thing Halden Voss had learned when he took the outpost, and it was the thing he kept learning, quietly, every day since. Even on the mildest afternoon in the shortest month of the colony's blue summer, a low, steady breath came off the eastern ice shelf and moved through the pines and around the eaves of the little stone house, so constant that a person forgot it the way a person forgot his own heartbeat, until it changed. That night the wind changed. Halden noticed it the way he noticed most things late, and only because some other part of him had been listening. He was in his chair by the wood stove with a book open on his knee, though he had not turned a page in some time. The stove door was propped a finger's width, so that the light shifted across the room in a slow orange breathing. His mug of tea had gone cold. Outside, snow had been falling since the last of the light, and the small blue lamp above the porch had grown a halo of white the size of a bushel. Then, between one gust and the next, the wind stopped whistling under the eaves and began to howl at them. Halden looked up. He had lived on this ridge for 3 winters. He knew the storms by their voices, the fat wet ones off the coast, the dry hissing ones that came down the ravine, the freezing sleet that always arrived at the wrong hour and made the anemometer sing. This one had come in from the west without any of the usual warnings, which meant the readings from the array had missed it, which meant the array had missed something else earlier in the day too, and he would have to be up on the ridge before dawn to trace the fault. He set the book aside. He put a stick of split ashwood into the stove and closed the door. He crossed to the window. The porch lantern showed him a moving wall of snow, and beyond it, nothing. The pines were only a suggestion. The road down to the valley was gone as if it had never been. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to, because standing at a window and looking out at weather was one of the few habits he had left from before, and habits, however small, were the walking sticks a man leaned on. He was about to turn back to the stove when he heard the sound. It was not the wind. The wind was doing what wind did, testing the seams of the roof, worrying at the shutters, moving snow around the yard. The sound was different. It was small and it did not belong. A wet, uneven crunch on the porch step. A pause. A second step. Then something that was not a step at all, that was a soft, apologetic collapse against the door. Halden crossed the room. He was not, as a rule, a fast man. He had been fast once, in the years when a body did what he asked and asked in return only that he not stop. Now he moved like a man who had learned to trust his knees. But he was at the door before the sound repeated. He set his hand flat to the wood and listened. What he heard on the other side was breathing, shallow, ragged, and quiet enough that another storm throw would have covered it. He worked the latch and opened the door a hand's width. Snow blew in and stuck to his shirt. He looked down. She was on his porch, folded to one knee, her forehead pressed to the frame of his door as if it had caught her on the way to the ground. Her hood had fallen back. Her hair, wet with snow, was the color of a river seen from a long way off, long and pale, and shot through with a violet that was not paint or dye but a color he did not know how to name, because it was hers. She was not human. She was, in the same instant, more clearly a person in trouble than anyone Halden had seen in a long time. Her skin was pale, the color of the underside of a cold shell, and beneath the wet cling of her hair, along the line of her jaw and down the side of her long neck, there ran a faint pattern of luminous marks, thin, almost silver, spaced like the strokes of some careful pen. The light in them was not steady. It flickered, or perhaps only her body flickered under it, the way a candle sometimes seems to gutter when it is really the wall that has moved. She had a cut on her temple that had bled down over the bridge of her nose and dried, and another darker wetness at her ribs that had not dried. Her hands were bare. Her fingers had gone the wrong color. Her eyes came up to his. Halden had heard of the Vaellyri. Every colonist on the fringe had the highlands beyond the pass, the silver people with the singing houses, the queen who kept her own counsel. He had never seen one. He did not think about any of that in the doorway. He thought about the color of her fingers. "You're going to fall," he said. His own voice sounded quiet to him, quieter than the wind. "Hold on, I've got you." He did not wait for her to answer. He pushed the door wide with his shoulder, went to one knee and slid his arm under hers. She weighed less than he expected. She had been strong, he could feel that. There was a working length to her, a muscle along the back that had not yet given up. But it was giving up now. She let him lift her. She let her head come to rest against his shoulder in the small, exhausted way of a person who had been holding herself together for hours by an act of will and had chosen, at last, to entrust that will to someone else. Her breath was hot on his neck, and it smelled of iron. He got her over the threshold. He pushed the door shut with his heel. The wind slammed against it and gave up. He carried her to the low bench by the stove and set her down as carefully as he had ever set anything down. Her head rolled toward the light. He said, without meaning to, the word he had said too many times in his life softly, to no one in particular, easy, and then he began. He was not a doctor. He had never pretended otherwise. But a man who lived a long way from a doctor learned certain things, or he did not live long. He had a station kit in the cupboard by the sink, a good one, better than most, because the colony administrator on Marrow's Reach was a decent woman who understood that people on ridges needed proper kits. He fetched it. He set it on the floor by the bench. He knelt. The first thing he did was pull off her wet outer layer. It was a garment he did not recognize, a long, fine coat that had been dark once and was now the color of a bruise, made of a cloth that moved under his hands like a live thing, warm-textured even though it was cold. It had been slit through at the ribs. The slit was neat at the edge and ragged at the middle, which meant something had gone in clean and been pulled out by a body that had not wanted it to. "Sorry," he said when he had to lift her arm to get the coat away. Her breath caught. Her eyes did not open. "Almost done, sorry." Under the coat she wore a shift of the same fine cloth, pale gray, and it was soaked through with blood down the whole right side of her body. He did not cut the shift away. A man did not cut a woman's clothes off in his front room if he could help it, but he lifted it aside enough to see. The wound was bad. It was not the worst he had seen, but it was bad enough. Deep, 6 centimeters long along the lower ribs and still bleeding sluggishly. Whoever had bandaged it had done it in a hurry. The pad was a strip torn from her own sleeve. It had come loose in the storm. He cleaned the wound. He did the small, careful work of it, the flush, the closure strips, the antiseptic seal, the compression bandage. His hands, which had been unsteady in the doorway, went steady for him. That was a mercy he did not question. When he was done with her side, he did her temple. The cut there was shallower, but the skin at her hairline was tender in a way that told him she had been hit, not fallen. He cleaned it, closed it, and worked a warm cloth over the dried blood on her cheek until her skin was her own color again. He fetched a blanket from the trunk under the window. It was the good blanket, the one Inez had woven the year the wool came in cheap. He had not put it on a person in 3 years. He tucked it around her. Then he went to the stove and got a mug of water warming, and while it warmed he took her hands in his and rubbed them, one at a time, until the wrong color had gone out of her fingers. The luminous marks along her jaw had steadied. He noticed that as he worked. When he had opened the door they had been flickering. Now they held a soft, even glow, faint as banked embers. He did not know what it meant. He guessed only that it was better than the alternative. The water on the stove began to whisper. He got a clean cloth and wet it and held it to her lips. Her lips parted. She drank without opening her eyes, a swallow, then 2. Then she turned her face away in a small refusal, and he did not press her. He set the cloth aside. He sat down on the floor beside the bench with his back to the stove, because the floor was where he was closest to her, and he waited. After a while, when the storm outside had settled back to its ordinary voice, and the wood in the stove had made its small settling sound, her eyes opened. They were not any color he had a word for, something between violet and honey. He met them without meaning to, and then, because it seemed rude not to, on purpose. "You're safe here," he said. "I'm Halden, this is my house, you're safe." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he began to worry he had said the wrong thing, or said it too soon, or said it in a language she did not speak, though the translator in the collar of his shirt had chirped once, softly, when he opened the door, which meant it had a lock on her. Then, very quietly, in a voice hoarse and low and unmistakably used to being listened to, she said, "Halden." "Yes. Thank you. You don't have to thank me." "I do." She closed her eyes again. Her breath was easier now. The bandage at her side was holding. "I do, Halden." He waited. "Vaellyri," she said. "Vaellyri." "Yes. That's a good name," he said, because he did not know what else to say and because it was true. Her mouth moved. He thought at first she was going to speak again, and then he realized she was trying to smile. She did not have the strength for it. The attempt reached her mouth and stopped there. But it had been an attempt, and it had been for him, and he sat on the floor beside her bench and looked at the small, unfinished shape of it and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in 3 winters, something like being seen back. He turned his face away, out of respect for both of them, and put another stick of ashwood into the stove. Outside, the wind picked up again and then, sometime in the small hours, laid itself down. Snow kept falling. The lamp on the porch went on burning under its white halo. In the house, a man who lived alone sat on the floor by a woman he did not know, and neither of them slept, and neither of them was, for the first time in a long time, alone. Marrow's Reach was not, on any map, an important place. A rock in the wrong part of a sky, chartered 40 years ago on the strength of a mineral survey that had turned out to be optimistic. The valley towns held on. The ridge stations held on. The Vaellyri in their high country beyond the pass kept their own council. Twice a year a delegation came down for the trade, and in between, the two peoples lived side by side without meeting each other's eyes. Halden ran wit's end. A stone house, a shed with the generator, and a 15-meter tower on the ridge above with the meteorological array. His job was to keep it all running and file the readings down to the valley office. There were 4 homesteads within a day's walk. He knew all of them. He looked in on the old woman at Fenner's Notch once a week and pretended it was on his way, because it was too far to be on his way, and she had figured that out long ago and let him have the pretense. His wife's name had been Anise. They had had 11 years of it, the paperwork, the crossing, the first winter that had almost broken them, the 6 after that when they had been, without either of them putting a word to it, happy. She had been the botanist for the ridge stations. She had been the one who had put the 7 photographs on the shelf. She had been the one who had woven the blanket. She had been, mostly, the one who had laughed. She had gone up the tower one wet spring morning to look at a sensor that had been reading strange, and the guy wire on the north stay had failed. He had been at the shed. He had heard the sound. He had reached her before her breathing stopped, and he had sat with her in the wet grass until the medic flew up from the valley, and he had not, in the 3 winters since, gone back up the tower without saying her name under his breath at the base of the ladder. He had thought in the first year that he would leave. In the 3rd, he had stopped thinking about it. He had learned the wind. He had learned to bake bread. He had learned to sit by the stove in the evening and read one of Anise's books and feel her nearness in the room, not as a ghost, which would have been unfair to her, but as a warmth, the way a stove was warm after the fire had gone out. He had been, in the phrase Anise had taught him from an old poet whose name he could no longer remember, keeping the fire. Now there was a woman on his bench with luminous marks along her jaw, and outside his window the snow had stopped falling, and the sky over the ridge was going gray in the way that meant dawn was still a long way off but coming, and the fire he had been keeping had, without asking his permission, put out a hand. He got up quietly. He put the kettle on. He set a bowl on the counter and measured out oats. She was going to need to eat when she could, and she was going to need to eat something that would not tax her. While the water heated, he stood at the window with his hands on the sill and looked at his yard. The porch lantern showed him the tracks she had made. They came out of the tree line at an angle that suggested she had missed the road, that she had come across country, through drifts, on legs that had not by then been reliable. He counted where she had fallen, 3 times in the last 100 meters. The 3rd time she had crawled and the porch step had caught her. He looked at the tracks for a long time. Then he made oatmeal, and he sweetened it with a little of the good honey he kept in the tin over the sink, and he took it to her on a tray, and he sat down on the floor beside her again and waited to see if she would eat. She did when she woke. A little. He held the spoon for her when her hand shook. She said thank you 3 times in 3 different tones, and each time he said, you don't have to, and each time she said, I do. And by the 3rd time it had become a small ritual between them, and there was, in the exchange, the faintest possible shape of a laugh, which she did not have the strength for, but which she offered him at the edge of her eyes, and he took it. She slept again after that. Haldon got up from the floor. His knee did not like him. He went to the porch and beat the snow off the boards and checked the lamp, and then he went back inside and put more wood in the stove and sat in his chair and watched her breathe. He thought about the medic in the valley, a good woman named Wren Ostrow who would come up the ridge if he called her. He thought about the colony office. He thought about the fact that whoever had put the blade into this woman's side had done it recently and with intent, and that a person did not walk down out of the Vaellyri highlands in a torn coat and bare hands unless she was running from something. He did not call the medic, not yet. He did not call the office. He would if her fever climbed or if she asked him to. Until then, he would sit in his chair and keep his fire and let her sleep. The luminous marks along her jaw glowed steady and soft. Outside, the light came up gray and blue over the ridge, and the ridge did not know yet what was coming down it. She woke again a little before mid-morning. Haldon had dozed in his chair. He had not meant to. He came back to himself the way a man comes back to himself when a room has changed while he was elsewhere. The light was different and the fire had settled, and the small breathing on the bench had a new quality to it. He blinked twice and looked at her. Her eyes were open. She was watching him, not with fever this time. She was watching him the way a person watched something they were trying to decide whether to trust. How long, she said. Her voice was steadier than in the night, still low, still hoarse. About 7 hours since you came in. He straightened. His book had slid off his knee. He set it aside. You slept about 6 of them. Good sleep mostly. Your temperature's better. She considered this. She lifted a hand slowly and touched the bandage at her side, and then with the same slow care the bandage at her temple. She did not wince. She was checking, he thought, whether the pieces of her were still where she had left them. Water, she said. He got water. He held the cup for her because her hand was still not steady, and she drank the whole cup, and then she said please in a voice with no scaffold under it, and he refilled it, and she drank half of the second one, and then she let her head down to the folded blanket he had put under it and closed her eyes. You're not going to hurry me, she said. No. You're not going to ask. No. Her eyes came open. They found him again. Why? He thought about the question for longer than he thought about most questions. Because you came to my door, he said finally, in a bad state, in a bad storm, because I have a stove and you didn't. Because if I asked you anything now you'd have to lie or you'd have to tell the truth, and either one costs you strength you don't have. When you're stronger, if you want to tell me who you are and what happened, I'll listen. If you don't, I won't. That's the deal. She looked at him. Haldon, she said, as if trying the shape of it out loud. Yes. You are not the man I thought I would find on this ridge. No, I imagine not, he half smiled. He did not know he still did that. There isn't much of me on this ridge to find. I run the weather. I read at night. I don't have any surprises to spring. You are a surprise, she said softly already. He did not know what to do with that. He got up. He put another stick in the stove. He fetched the second bowl of oatmeal, because the first one had been small, and this time she took the spoon from him and fed herself slowly, and he watched, without watching too obviously, in case her hand failed and she needed a hand under it. Her hand did not fail. Her hand was steadier for the food. He was glad of that in a way that was disproportionate to the size of the thing, and he sat back on the floor and let himself be glad. "May I ask you one thing?" she said, when the bowl was half empty. "Yes." "How far are we from the pass?" He thought about it. 9 kilometers as the crow flies, 14 on the road. The road is snowed under until the plow comes through, which won't be today. And down to the valley. 22 on the road. There's a valley office, there's a medic, there's a comm relay, all of those are down. You want any of them? Not yet. All right, he waited. He was not going to press, but she was going to say the next thing anyway. He could see it in her face. "Halden," she said, "if someone were to come to your door today, armed, in some number, asking after me by a name that is not Vaellyri, you should not tell them anything, and you should not, if you can help it, be between them and me." He kept his face still. "Are they going to come?" "I don't know, I hope not. But if they come today, it will be because they were faster than I thought, and they were smarter than I thought, and their tracker in my coat lasted longer in the snow than it should have." Her mouth thinned. "I threw the coat in the creek at the bottom of the pines. If it kept transmitting, it did so in the water." "You threw your coat in the creek?" "Yes." "That was clever." She looked at him with an expression he could not read. "You are not surprised that I have people trying to find me," she said. "No, ma'am. I saw you when you fell in. Nobody comes down out of the highlands in that shape, at that hour, in that weather, unless they are running from something that came for them with a knife, which is not a guess, which is what happened. I did the bandage." "I don't need to know who," Halden said. "I said I wouldn't ask, and I'm not asking. But if they come today, I know how to be unhelpful to strangers. I've had practice. I've been the last man on this ridge for a long time. If they come and they ask, they will get a man who runs the weather and doesn't know anything about anything, and who has an unfortunate habit of misplacing his authorization to let people onto his property. If they push, they will have to push through a door I know how to close. That's what I've got. I want you to know that's what I've got." Her eyes filled once quickly, and she closed them and did not let it happen. When she opened them, she was steady again. "You do not know," she said, "what I am asking of you, and you are giving it to me anyway." "No," he said, "I know exactly what I'm giving you. I'm giving you my morning and my afternoon, and if it comes to it, my evening. That's not much. I've got the rest of the winter after that." "It is more than most," she said. "It's what's here." She looked at him for a long time. "Vaellyri is my name," she said. "It is the name my mother gave me. The other name I have is not today, my friend. Today I am Vaellyri, a woman who came to your door with a knife wound and asked for shelter, and I have been given more than shelter." "You've been given oatmeal," Halden said. "You've been given a couch." Her mouth curved. This time she had the strength for it. "You are a very stubborn man." "I have been called worse. I have been called worse by better people. Inez used to say she was my wife. She used to say I was allergic to being thanked." "Inez," Vaellyri said. The name landed in her softly. She lifted her eyes to the shelf where the 7 photographs stood, though she could not have known which ones were Inez from that angle. Perhaps she had noticed them in the night. Perhaps she was only guessing. "You had a wife." "For a while." "She is not here." "No." "I am sorry." He nodded. He did not, as a rule, talk about it. He would have said he was not going to talk about it now. He had said so, in the abstract, to himself, more than once. But he was on a floor beside a woman who had just given him a name and a warning in the same breath, and he found the words did not, for once, require the wall he usually put behind them. 3 winters ago, he said, a sensor on the ridge tower, guy wire failed. It wasn't anything anyone had done wrong. It was one of those things. She died in the yard. I sat with her. He looked at his hands. He did not know why he was showing them to her, but there they were on his knees, palms up, and he did not put them away. I've been keeping the fire since. That was what she used to call it, keeping the fire. She said if you had a life and it was hard and you loved somebody who was also having a hard time, the two of you were keeping the fire together and the fire didn't care whose stick was on it. She got that from an old poet. I don't remember which. She had a way of saying things. She sounds like a woman worth keeping the fire with. She was. You have kept it alone. I have. That is a heavy thing, Halden. So I am told. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, in my house, when we lose someone we loved, we do a thing that is like you're keeping the fire. We, the surviving one, we go and sit at the highest window we have in our house, and we open the window, and we let the wind of the mountain come in for a night. It is meant to say, I will not close myself. I will let the cold in. I will let the loss be a real thing in the room and not a thing I have shut out. And in the morning, in the room where the loss has been, someone brings us broth. Someone brings you broth. Yes. He thought about that. You'd have gotten broth this morning, he said. I meant to make broth. The oatmeal was because it was quicker, I'm sorry. Her eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were wet. You do not know, she said, the things you are saying. I probably don't. I say what's on the counter, that's an old habit. It got me through the first year. She let her head down to the blanket. She looked at the ceiling, his low ceiling, with the crossbeam he had planed himself, and the little ash mark from the year a stovepipe joint had let go, and she looked at it for a long time, and Halden, on the floor, understood without being told that she was resting inside herself, in a way she had not been able to rest before. You should sleep more, he said. I'll make broth, I have chicken, it'll take an hour. Yes, she said, please. He got up and went to the kitchen and did the small, honest work of making broth for a person who needed it. He heard, behind him, her breathing slow. When he came back to check on her, she was asleep again, and her hand had come out from under the blanket and was resting palm up on the bench, as if she had been reaching for something and had, in the middle of the reach, given the reach itself permission to be enough. He did not touch her hand. He sat down on the floor beside her, and he watched the fire, and the broth simmered on the stove, and the light through the window went from gray-blue to gray-white to the pale, clean color that was as much sun as Marrow's reach got in blue winter, and no one came down the road, and the wind stayed lazy, and the small, warm room held. By noon her fever was down to nothing. By early afternoon she was sitting up. She sat up on her own without asking his help, and although he had watched her doing it and been ready to catch her, he had not intervened because he had recognized the way she was doing it, the way of a person who needed to prove to their own body that the body still worked. He knew that way. He had done it himself more than once. He had learned in doing it to let the person have their moment. She sat on the edge of the bench with the blanket around her shoulders and her hair loose over it, and she looked around his front room properly for the first time. He watched her look. She looked at the shelf of Anis's books, the 7 photographs, the copper kettle, the row of hooks by the door and the coat that had been Anis's, still on its hook the way it had been for 3 winters. She said, "It is a good house. It is a small house." I did not say it was a big house. I said it was a good house. I have been in many. I know the difference. He nodded. He did not quite know what to do with a compliment about his house, but he took it. She looked at Anis's coat. "May I ask?" she said. "Ask. Do you have anything in this house, anything at all, that would fit me, that would let me stand at your window without shivering?" He looked at her. He looked at the coat on the hook. He thought about it. "You'd swim in it," he said. "You're taller than she was, but it would go around you. It would keep you warm." I would treat it kindly. I know you would. He got up, he crossed the room. He lifted Inese's coat off its hook, and he held it a moment against his chest, and then he brought it back to Vaellyri and laid it across her lap. She put her hand on it. She did not put it on. She only put her hand on it. Thank you, she said. Inese would like that you're wearing it. Inese was, she took people in. She took people in the way a house takes in weather. It was her defining feature. If she had been here last night, you'd have come in through the same door, but she'd have had the broth going before I'd have thought of the oatmeal. She sounds, Vaellyri said, like a person the world does not make enough of. No, it does not. She held the coat. There is a thing, she said slowly, I want to say to you, and I do not want to say it in a way that turns your kindness into a bill. There is no bill. There will not be a bill. But I want you to hear it before the rest of what is coming down this ridge arrives at your door, so that when it arrives, you know what you have already been given. He waited. You have, she said, for the space of one night and one morning, been the only person in a very long time who has treated me as if I were only a woman. He looked at her. That is a great deal, Halden, she said. I do not think you know how great a deal that is. I do not think you know what it costs some days to be the other thing I am, and I do not want to tell you what the other thing is yet because I do not want to lose this hour. I want this hour. When the hour is over, I will tell you. I promise. But please, for one more hour, let me be Vaellyri and let me sit in your good house in your wife's coat, and let me drink the broth you have been making since morning, and let me be only that. She had not raised her voice. She had not raised it once all morning. Halden nodded. He nodded because he did not trust his own voice, and he did not want the first thing he said to her after that to be small. He turned to the stove. He ladled broth into a bowl. He brought it to her, and he set it in her hands, and he watched her hands close around the bowl and go still for a moment, as if the warmth of it were something she needed to feel before she remembered what warmth was for. She ate slowly. He sat back down beside her on the floor. Neither of them spoke. When she had finished, she set the bowl aside on the bench, and she looked at him for a long time, and she did not say what he half thought she was going to say. She said something else. When they come, she said, they will not know me at first. I do not look today the way I look at court. The luminous lines along the jaw are dimmer when I am unwell. My hair has not been dressed. My mother's ring is at the bottom of the creek in the pines with my coat. I will be Vaellyri to them until I choose otherwise, and I will not choose otherwise until you are safe. Vaellyri. Yes. Whatever the other thing you are is, it doesn't change what I do. If they come, they don't come through this door easily. That was the deal I already made. I'm not making a different one now. Her eyes softened. I know, she said. That is why I am telling you. She reached her hand out slowly from under the blanket, and she laid it on the back of his hand where it rested on his knee, and she left it there. Her hand was warm now. The wrong color had gone from it hours ago. Under the pads of his fingers on the back of hers, he could feel the faint, steady thrum that he thought must be her pulse, or her light, or both. Halden, she said. There is one more thing. Yes. If it comes down to it, do not fight them. Do not raise a weapon in this house on my behalf. Not because you would not win, you might, but because if you did and I lived, I would spend the rest of my life carrying that fight forward for you, and I would do it, and I would do it well, but I do not want to spend the rest of my life on a fight. I want to spend it on other things. Do you hear me? I hear you. Promise. I promise. Thank you. She let her hand rest on his a moment longer, and then she took it back gently and drew the blanket up around herself, and she leaned her head against the wall behind the bench, and she closed her eyes not to sleep, only to rest inside herself again. He watched her breathe. He watched the small movement of the luminous marks along her jaw. He sat with her on the floor beside her bench, in his own front room, in a house he had not, until an hour ago, understood was any longer a place where two people could sit. Outside, the ridge road remained snowed under. But not for long. The skimmers came in at the edge of the second hour past noon. Halden heard them before he saw them. He was outside on the porch, throwing salt on the step so that no one would slip on the ice that had crusted where the snow had melted and refrozen. He heard the low double note of Vaellyri drive coils before he heard the crunch of them on air. He put the salt tin down on the rail and looked up the road. They came down the ridge in a formation of three, one lead skimmer, two abreast behind, moving in the professional pacing of people who intended to be seen coming. The lead skimmer bore on its prow a device Halden had not seen up close before but had seen in colony broadsheets, a spiral of white on a field of deep, deep blue, with three small dark stars arranged along its curve, the livery of the Vaellyri royal house. He stood on his porch and watched them come. He did not, at any point, put his hand on the rifle inside the door. He had promised. He had also seen the number of soldiers, and he had done that math immediately, and there had never really been a question. He had, however, thought about the doorway, where he would stand in it, and how, and about the tone of voice he would use, and about what he would and would not say. Those were things he had practiced in a life whose habits he had not thought would be useful again. The skimmers set down in his yard, the lead one first, then the wings. 10 Vaellyri stepped out. They were all taller than Vaellyri, taller than Halden, and they were all in armor of a kind Halden had also, until this moment, only seen in broadsheets. It was silver, not the cheap silver of a colony parade dress, but a deep-worked silver that looked as if it had been sung into shape, and it moved as they moved, in a way that made a person understand that the armor was not put on them but grown with them, in some sense, a second skin they had earned. Their hair, without exception, was pinned high and back in the tight warrior not the Highlands were famous for. Their eyes, without exception, went first to him, and then, more slowly and much more carefully, past him to the door. The tallest of them stepped forward. She wore, in addition to the silver, a thin band of white gold at her brow, and the luminous marks along her own jaw were sharper than Vaellyri's, brighter, and pulsed once as she stopped 10 paces from his porch step. She was a woman in the middle of her strength. Her face was carved. Her mouth was flat. She looked at Halden with the kind of look Halden had in his life been given by exactly two other people, a colony judge once and Anise's mother the first time they had met, and both of those looks he had survived. "Human," she said. Her voice was low and it carried. "I am Vaellyri's Corin, captain of the guard of the house Anavish in service to the queen of the Vaellyri. I ask you to answer me plainly. Where is my queen?" Halden was silent for a beat. He had had, in the long, slow morning, more than a suspicion. He had had a certainty, and he had left it in the corner of the room where certainties belonged when they were not going to help anyone. Now the certainty stepped out into the middle of his yard, in silver armor, at 10 paces, and asked him plainly to look at it. "Captain," he said. He kept his voice as level as hers. "I am Halden Voss. I run this station. I am going to ask you to tell me a little more of what you are looking for because I have had a hard night and I do not want to be unhelpful by accident." Vaellyri's Corin considered him. "The queen of the Vaellyri," she said evenly, "was traveling by escort to a meeting at the pass yesterday afternoon. Her escort was attacked. The primary skimmer was brought down 2 ridges east of here. Her guard captain, Nerath Vel, my brother, was killed in that attack. The rest of the guard died at the crash site defending her. She left the site on foot alone in the storm, wounded. We have been tracking her since. Her track ends, as best we can read it, at the tree line behind your house. Your yard shows 2 sets of tracks, hers coming in and one leaving, which is your porch step being cleared. Which is you. Which means, human, that at some point in the last 20 hours, my queen either walked into your house or died within 100 meters of it. I do not intend to leave until I know which." Halden held her eyes. "Captain Corin," he said, "I am sorry about your brother." Something flickered in her face. It was the smallest possible thing, but he had said it first before anything else, and she had heard it. "Thank you, human," she said quietly. "I don't know your queen," Halden said. "I have never met her. I would not know her if she walked past me in a market. But I will tell you plainly, because you asked me plainly, that I have a woman in my house right now whom I do not know, who came to my door last night in a bad state, hurt, cold, bleeding, alone, and asked for shelter. I gave her shelter. I bandaged her side. I gave her broth. I gave her my wife's coat. She has been sleeping most of the day. She has told me her name is Vaellyri, and she has told me nothing else about herself, and I have not asked. If she is your queen, I did not know it when I opened the door. I know it now because you told me. That is where we are, Captain." Vaellyri's Corin did not move. "Bring her out," she said softly. "Please." "I will not bring her out," Halden said in the same soft voice. "I will go inside and I will tell her that you are here, and I will let her decide whether to come out. That is what I owe her. I owe her that because she came to my door and asked for it. That is the last thing I am going to do that any of us are going to argue about. After that, I will do what she says." He waited. For a moment there was no sound in the yard but the ticking of the skimmers cooling. Then behind him the door of his house opened. It opened slowly and evenly, the way a person opened a door when the person had been standing behind it for a while, listening, and had decided the moment. Vaellyri stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing Anis's coat. It was too short in the sleeve and it hung wrong at the shoulder, and it was, in every way, the wrong coat, and she wore it as if it had been made for her. She had drawn her hair back, in the small time between the skimmers landing and this moment, with a bit of cord Halden had not seen her find. Her feet were bare. The bandage at her side made a soft ridge under the coat. She stopped in front of Halden. She did not step in front of him. She did not step behind him. She stopped beside him, at his shoulder in the same spot on the porch, so that the two of them stood there together in the pale midday light. The luminous marks along her jaw, which had been steady and soft all morning, brightened. They did not flicker. They came up in a slow, deliberate way, the way a lamp came up when a hand turned the wick. In 10 seconds they had gone from the bank timber glow he had grown used to sitting beside, to a clear silver light that shone along her jaw and down her throat, and he realized, down the two thin lines at her collarbones and along both her wrists. The light was not blinding. It was quiet. It was the quiet of a very bright thing that had chosen to be quiet. In the yard, 10 Vaellyri went to one knee. They did it all at once, as if to a common signal. The armor made a small silver sound. Their heads bowed. Vaellyri's Corin, who had been the first to speak, went to her knee last of the 10 and lowest of the 10, and set the flat of her palm against the packed snow of Halden's yard, and did not lift her eyes. "My queen," Vaellyri said. Vaellyri looked at her guards. Halden could not at that moment look at Vaellyri. He looked at the yard. He looked at Vaellyri's silver knee in his snow. He looked at the spiral on the prow of the lead skimmer. He looked at the salt tin on his rail. He looked at his own hand on the porch post, and he saw that it was steady, which surprised him a little, and which, he understood, in a small clear way that he did not have time to unpack, was because Vaellyri had put her hand on his forearm without seeming to, without asking, and left it there. "Rise, Vaellyri said. Vaellyri rose. The 9 behind her rose with her. "I am well," Vaellyri said. "I have been well since perhaps 2 hours after I fell against this porch, though I did not know it until this morning. I have been fed and bandaged and warmed. My wound is closed. My fever has broken. The blade did not reach anything essential, thanks to the medic who worked on me, and thanks to the man who stood between me and the storm long enough for my body to remember what it was doing." She looked at Halden then, only briefly. She said it then, out loud in front of them. "Halden Voss," she said, "of Wits End Station, runner of the weather on this ridge, widower of a woman named Anis who took people in the way a house takes in weather." This is the man who kept me alive last night. He did not know me. He did not ask my name until I gave it. He offered me a name and a stove and his wife's coat. He offered me an hour in which to be only a woman. He offered me, when he learned that hard people might come to his door for me, the shape of himself in the door and a promise not to raise his hand under his own roof, and a promise instead to open a door and let me speak. I have opened his door. I have spoken. He is not a subject of the Vaellyri, and he is not, beyond the treaty he has been living under without asking to, under any obligation to my house. But he is under my hand from this day, if he will have it, and he will not be touched, or questioned, or made to answer for what he did here. Vaellyri. Do you hear me? I hear you, my queen. Say it back. He is under your hand. He will not be touched or questioned or made to answer. On my life, my queen. On your life, Vaellyri said softly, thank you. She looked then at the 9 other guards, and each of them in turn put a fist to their heart and bowed. Vaellyri turned her head, half a degree toward Halden. Halden, she said, very quietly so that only he could hear it, I am sorry that I brought a court to your porch. I did not want to bring a court to your porch. You didn't bring it, Halden said. His voice was rough. He cleared it. It came. You handled it. I'm glad you handled it. I am going to sit down soon, she said. I have been standing for longer than I should have been. In a moment I am going to lean on you if you don't mind and let you take me back inside. Vaellyri will follow, I think. She will want to see for herself that I have been well cared for. I would like her to see. She has lost her brother and she has slept less than I have. She needs to see with her own eyes. Come inside, Halden said to Vaellyri over Vaellyri's head. Any of you who need to warm up, come inside. I have broth. I have tea. I have room by the stove. My house is small, but there is room by the stove. Vaellyri's Corin looked at him for a long moment, in a way that was different from the way she had first looked at him. The recalibration of a woman who had come down a ridge in silver armor, prepared to burn a house to the ground, and who was now standing in the yard of a house she was, instead, being invited into. Halden Voss, she said slowly, my brother would have liked you. I would have liked to meet him. You would have. Then she did an odd thing. She unbuckled from her belt a short blade in a silver sheath, not a ceremonial thing, a working blade, the kind of blade a captain of a guard carried and used, and she stepped forward and set it, hilt first, on the porch rail beside the salt tin. For your porch, she said. For the door you opened. It is not the custom of my house to give a blade for peace. It is the custom of my house to give a blade for a debt. I owe you a debt. Please, accept it. Halden looked at the blade. He looked at Vaellyri. I accept, he said. She nodded once and stepped back. Vaellyri's hand tightened, very briefly, on Halden's forearm. Let's go in, she said. He turned, and he opened the door of his own house for the second time in 14 hours to let a woman across the threshold, who was not the same woman she had been when she came in the first time, and yet, he understood, was exactly the same woman, and had been the same woman all along, and had only ever asked him to see her as such. He let her lean on him. She weighed no more than she had when he had carried her in from the porch the night before. He got her into the chair, his own chair by the stove, not the bench where she had lain, and he put the blanket over her knees, and he stoked the fire, and he set the kettle back on, and behind him, Vaellyri's Corin and 2 of her guards came in quietly and stood by the door and did not speak and watched. They watched the small room, they watched the stove, they watched the copper kettle, they watched the shelf of Inez's books, they watched the 7 photographs. They watched the man in the shirt with the salt on the sleeve pour hot broth into a bowl for a woman in his wife's coat, and set it in her hands, and stand a moment beside her chair to make sure the bowl was steady before he let it go. Vaellyri's Corin at the door put her hand to her heart and did not take it away for a long time. They stayed 2 days. The Vaellyri stayed because Vaellyri was not yet fit to travel, and because Vaellyri, having found her, was not going to let her out of arm's reach until she had personally seen her walk 500 meters unaided. Vaellyri agreed to this with the fond exasperation of a woman who had been managed by this particular captain, since they were both girls. She told Haldon in the small hours of the second night that Vaellyri and her brother had been her closest friends. She told him also that the coup, she used the word plainly that time, sitting in Haldon's chair with the blanket around her, had been small and quick, and already put down by the time Vaellyri had found her, but that the price of putting it down had been Nerath's life, and that she was going to spend a long time paying it. He sat with her while she said it. He said only once, "I'm sorry," and once later, "Nerath's name will get said in this house at solstice, if you'll allow it," and she put her hand on his and closed her eyes and did not speak again for a long while. On the morning of the third day, the skimmers left. They left with more ceremony than they had come. Vaellyri walked out to the lead skimmer under her own power, in a proper Vaellyri traveling cloak that Vaellyri had brought up the ridge for her that morning. Inise's coat she left folded on the bench inside, with a small note tucked into the collar. Haldon did not read the note until later. When he did, he found that it was a single line, in an even, careful hand. "I have kept the fire with you for one night. I would like to come back and keep it longer if you will have me," and he read it twice, and he folded it again, and he set it on the mantel beside the copper kettle where he would see it every morning. Vaellyri stopped at the porch step before she got into the skimmer. She turned and she looked at him. "Haldon Voss," she said out loud in a voice that was the voice she used at court so that her guards could hear it and it would be heard. "I am going down to the valley. I am going to the pass. There is a great deal of work in front of me. I will send word within the week. I will come if you will let me before the first thaw. I will come if you will let me not as your queen. I do not need to be a queen inside your door. I would like when I come to be what I was for you that first hour. Only Vaellyri, sitting at your stove, wearing your wife's coat if it does not pain you to see it on me, eating your broth, and I would like to bring one thing if you will let me. I would like to bring in a small carved box a spool of white cord from my mother's house, so that on some morning when the wind lays down, we can put a new guy wire on your tower. That is a thing I would like to help you do." He did not for a moment have any words. He nodded. Then he found one word. "Come," he said. She smiled. She had by then the strength for it. It was a slow smile and it reached the luminous marks along her jaw so that they glowed briefly brighter and then settled. "I will," she said. She got into the skimmer. Vaellyri at the door gave Haldon one last look, which was not the look she had given him in the yard on the first day, and was not the look she had given him at the door on the second. It was a third look, a new one that he did not yet have a word for, but that he understood was going to be, if he was fortunate, a look he would come to know. The skimmers lifted. They went down the ridge road above the tree line, 3 abreast this time, in no formation at all, the way friends drove home together. Haldon stood on his porch until the sound of them was gone. The wind was very quiet. He turned and he went back into his house. The bench where she had lain was empty. Inise's blanket was folded on the arm of the chair. On the mantel, beside the copper kettle, there was a folded note, and beside it the silver-sheathed blade, which he understood he was going to keep polished and hung on a peg by the door for what remained of his winters. He sat down in his chair. He put a stick of ashwood in the stove. He picked up his book from where it had fallen, and he found the page he had not turned, and he read it. Then he set the book down and he looked at the note on the mantel, and he said softly to no one and to everyone, "All right." Outside on Merrow's Reach, the wind that never stopped picked up again from the east and moved through the pines and around the eaves and past the tower on the ridge in its old familiar way. But there were now 2 people keeping the fire, and one of them was coming back.